This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:06. Time for KUOW's Week in Review.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. We set aside this time every Friday to figure out what happened this week and why it matters. And I have, as always, a panel of super friends and super journalists. And this week we have New York Times technology correspondent Karen Weise. Welcome back, Karen.
Hey there. Hi.
PubliCola editor Erica C. Barnett. Welcome back, C.
Hi, Bill. Good to be here.
Thank you for coming, Erica. KUOW reporter Casey Martin. Thanks for coming on the show, Casey. Great to have you.
Thanks, Bill, for having me.
You can watch us live if you want. I wouldn't have guessed which college pennant Casey Martin would have on the wall behind him. How would I know? You can see the show on Facebook or on YouTube. You just search KUOW Public Radio. And one more little note. Please join us next week when we're going to do a live year in review on a Thursday evening. So it's coming up this Thursday, December 17th, this next Thursday evening. You can see it on YouTube and you can find out more about it. It's a free event. RSVP right here. Go to KUOW.org/events to RSVP for the Thursday night year in review. KUOW.org/events, and what a year. Okay, let's start in on what a week. This week, two Seattle leaders, Mayor Jenny Durkan and School Superintendent Denise Juneau, announced they'll leave at the end of their term. This continues the high turnover we've seen in both the mayor and school superintendent jobs. Of course, our police chief also left earlier this year. So it's natural to ask, what's going on with Seattle? Well, Superintendent Juneau, who came here from Montana, told me that in Seattle, there's a perception that leaders need to be perfect.
They need to be doing everything for everyone in an urgent and important way, and it better be quick. And I think that there's something that we need to really try to unpack there and prioritize different things. Because I think if we set out timelines and priorities with community, we can definitely get those things done. It's just when everything becomes important and urgent, it is an unfair burden on leadership to try to get it all done at the same time.
When I spoke to Mayor Durkan about her decision not to run for re-election, she mentioned, among other things, Seattle's toxic political atmosphere.
You know, I had people come to my home many, many times. People have a right to protest. They have a right to demonstrate. They have a right to question and criticize the mayor. But when you have hate speech and vandalism, when you have death threats against not just me, but my children and my family, that has no place in our politics. And I think we do have to change that, because I do think it will deter other people from wanting to serve.
Is it fair to blame this turnover on Seattle culture? Mayor Durkan made a point of telling me she is not leaving because of political division and anger. She said she wants to focus on the city's big challenges next year without having to campaign. And her political opponents, who don't condone hate speech and harassment, say that Durkan is being deservedly criticized for specific actions related to police brutality, homelessness, income inequality, and city governance. As for the school superintendent, the school board president told the Seattle Times that the board wasn't going to renew her contract anyway. KUOW education reporter Ann Dornfeld gave us some possible reasons why.
But board members have been critical of how she's addressed the needs of the most vulnerable students during COVID-19. Juneau has repeatedly clashed with the teachers union over her reported failure to involve them in key decisions, especially over health and safety issues during the pandemic. The local NAACP branch and its youth council have been calling for Juneau's termination for months, citing, among other reasons, the district's handling of staff who abuse students. This week, the special education PTSA took a no-confidence vote in the district. This comes after KUOW reported that a Black 8-year-old with disabilities had been repeatedly placed in a fenced outdoor area with the district's approval.
So it's about the specific situations of these leaders. It's about Seattle culture. I ask you, Week in Review panel, I'll start with you, Erica C. Barnett. How did you analyze the departures of the week? I know you especially follow Mayor Durkan.
I think that in general, no, people don't expect local leaders to be quote unquote perfect. Both of those those bits of audio that you played sound like people who know that they can't continue in their jobs. In this case of Superintendent Juneau, because she wasn't going to get approved. Durkan, maybe felt that she would have a very challenging reelection. And I think in the case of Durkan, there are a lot of reasons that she decided to step down. But one of them is almost certainly that she did not anticipate the negative feedback she would get and the challenges of the job. She had never been an elected official before, and I don't believe that she quite expected the amount of criticism she would get for decisions that she made. And that is what I think most of it is, without regard for things like hate speech and threats, which unfortunately politicians do get now. And that is a really unfortunate thing that happens to all politicians now. But, I think she's gotten huge pushback from activists for her positions on the police force and whether the city's approach to policing should change. I think she has made a bunch of decisions that have been unpopular, and she's gotten negative feedback for those. And I don't think that fits in with her idea of what the role of mayor is, which is essentially to make decisions and put out happy messages and get feedback that's mostly positive. She's run the mayor's office largely as a communications office, and that doesn't really work at any time, but particularly in times of crisis, it's really hard to think of your job that way.
I remember first seeing Durkan, before everything had unfolded this year, when there was talk about the NHL coming to Seattle, and it felt like that's when Durkan was on top. It was early. It was like 7 a.m. at a bar, and she was there, and it was just this very celebratory mood, and she had arms around people, and to see, from that moment to then, being outside of her home when, council members were protesting outside of her place, to when she was being booed outside of a fire station and people were chanting, "No more gas, no more gas." To see that and how she was able to, not really react, all that well, not that strongly to a lot of these crowds, a lot that happened this summer. As Erica said, she didn't really seem to be prepared for that, and at least have a really strong communication or reaction to a lot of these activists and protesters from the summer.
Yeah, governing is really hard, and I don't think there's like narrative that Seattle is ungovernable, and I don't think that's true. If you look back, Mayor Murray had obviously many flaws, but he in the kind of negotiations he set up for the $15 minimum wage really brought together, made a very kind of progressive policy. He brought along kind of centrist Seattle to a very progressive policy, and by kind of forcing this collaborative process, and he was in the process of trying to do that around housing when his whole scandal blew up and stuff. But I think that was kind of a very successful form of governance, and it wasn't that long ago, just that you can kind of navigate the kind of poles of the city to the extent it is polarized.
And I think just on the question of governance, I think that one of the challenges that the mayor had was that she does not like to delegate responsibility. And so there was a level of micromanagement that people reported to me over and over again, frustration with the fact that the mayor had to be hands-on with absolutely everything and be involved in and know about everything. And so I think that led to a certain level of paralysis in terms of policy. I mean, point to any giant policy that the mayor, or I would challenge you rather to point to any giant policy that the mayor has gotten passed. And I think that paralysis is a big part of it. It's, it's wanting to control the message, and it's also wanting to control the policy at this really granular level where you don't trust people. And that actually filtered into the announcement that she wasn't running. A lot of people that were pretty high up in her administration, including department heads, found out about it from the media, because the announcement that went out to city staff didn't go out until several hours after we and at PubliCola and every other media outlet, KUOW, everybody was reporting it.
Well, I also want to keep in mind the tremendous challenges that the mayor was facing with the policing and protest situation, and we'll get into news this week about how poorly that was sometimes handled, but also a homelessness emergency exacerbated. This is all these are all things that the mayor reminded me of this week. The homelessness emergency against the backdrop of a pandemic, where suddenly people can't be sheltered together and be kept safe. Is it is it fair to measure whose term could we measure Mayor Durkan's term against in terms of challenges? Anybody's? Is it just, well, every term's got a challenge?
I mean, this is a historic year. I don't think anyone in the world can think it's not.
I forgot to mention a tax debate against the backdrop of massive income inequality. Yes, go on, Karen.
But also, like I mentioned, Mayor Murray's administration was through those explosive growth years in the city, which were very tumultuous. And I think you can't look at what the governor's done and not see him really find a calling in this moment of crisis and really feel him be a stronger leader this past year than he had been in the past. So he has a different set of circumstances he's dealing with, and obviously the state is diverse in different ways, but he is certainly, I think, emerged from this as a stronger leader, and I think is generally seen as such.
Let me say a little more about the policing ruling this week. A federal judge found Seattle police in contempt of court in 4 instances for using pepper spray, blast balls during Black Lives Matter protests this past fall. Casey, do we have any sense on what effect this will have on the police department? What sanctions there will be?
We don't know what any punishments could be. In the past there's been slaps on the wrist. I imagine that certainly nobody's going to get fired necessarily for this. I'd be surprised at if anybody was talking about leave of absence or anything like that. Yeah, so it's really we just don't know yet what might happen. I think that the long-term effect is that this really it helps a lot of the critics of policing, a lot of the critics of Seattle police that can point to this is a firm legal standing. This is a judge's ruling that says here is the police acting in using excessive force, violating this use of excessive force, that they can certainly point at and use. So I think that might be the longer-term effect from this ruling, is that it'll definitely help a lot of the critics, people who are looking for more of an aggressive defunding of SPD, looking for more changes out of the police department. I think that might be the longer term effect. As far as punishments, I think it'll be interesting to watch. It's really unclear right now what might happen.
Erica, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there also, I would add, just could be financial penalties, which the city doesn't love. The cost of financial penalties and lawsuits and things like that have continued to go up over the last several years. So that is another potential. There's a lot of plaintiffs in this case. So that's another potential, thing that could go beyond a slap on the wrist. I do think that one thing that was interesting about the ruling is Judge Jones categorically dismissed this argument the city was making that SPD wasn't liable for the actions of individual officers. That he called that novel and innovative. And I agree. Not being a lawyer, the idea that the Seattle Police Department has a blanket exemption from the law if it's individual officers, supposedly acting on their own initiative does strike me as very novel, and that was struck down pretty explicitly in the ruling.
Well, finally, let me end this segment by reminding that when Mayor Durkan announced her decision not to run again, she said she wants to focus on not on campaigning, but on the big challenges. That included the pandemic. And I'm just going to recap this week's pandemic news. Governor Inslee extended the COVID restrictions until at least January 4th. So no indoor dining, and retails and grocery stores are at 25% capacity, theaters and gyms closed, no indoor gatherings with people outside your immediate household unless you quarantine and test negative. Outdoor gatherings limited to 5 people. The state health secretary said there's some indication that the rapid spread of the virus has slowed, but it's too early to know for sure. The governor said 80% of the state's ICU beds are occupied. The Washington Hospitality Association called the governor's decision to extend those restrictions heartbreaking and outrageous.
This has come at the worst time, which is supposed to be our most joyous time of the year.
That's Anthony Anton, head of the Washington Hospitality Association, who says many restaurants depend on holiday business to tide them over in the winter. He says keeping restaurants closed will lead to more than 100,000 unemployed workers and restaurants just going out of business. More than 1,000 restaurants and bars in King County have closed permanently since the start of the pandemic. The governor announced another $50 million in state business grants and promised that the state will temporarily cover unemployment benefits to freelancers and gig workers if Congress doesn't renew that program by Christmas. A couple other things. Tomorrow's Husky football game against Oregon is canceled. Tomorrow's Major League Soccer finals, Seattle Sounders, by the way, canceled because of COVID. Seattle Sounders against Columbus Crew in Ohio tomorrow. That match is still on so far, even though a Columbus player has just tested positive for COVID-19. And finally, the first doses of COVID vaccines could get to Washington State next week, almost 400,000 doses, which will go to healthcare workers and first responders caring for COVID patients, as well as residents and staff at long-term care facilities. We don't know exactly where those doses will go yet. That's a lot. Any reaction to where we are here? It's December 11th in this pandemic.
I just hoped the curve would have bent more by now, because we've had about a month of these tighter restrictions, more than a month. And I guess the fact that it didn't go up after Thanksgiving, or doesn't appear to have risen after Thanksgiving, is a success in some sense. But yeah, and the indoor dining thing, I don't know if you guys saw that study out of South Korea recently that it was chilling. It was about kind of distanced indoor dining, and within 5 minutes, a infected diner infected 2 other people that were 20 feet away in the restaurant because of how the fans were blowing air. I mean, it's heartbreaking for restaurants, but it does not appear to be safe, and that's just what it is. So we need more assistance or something like that, because from a public health perspective, it's just not there.
Yeah, I hope that we, can continue to get more information like that study in South Korea, which I think points to, things that restaurants can actually, eventually do, maybe like improving their circulation systems. I think that the amount of stuff we don't know about this virus to this day is really alarming. I am personally very upset that, my gym isn't open, the YMCA, but you know what? I don't know what their filtration and ventilation systems are. I don't know if it's blowing air on me from a treadmill 15 feet away. So I think, as devastating as this obviously is for a lot of these industries, it's we just don't know yet, and maybe won't know for a long time exactly how this virus is spreading. So while I agree, it's really disappointing that we can't go to restaurants and can't go to gyms and can't go to bars. It's just we can't make an argument against a pandemic. We can't argue with a virus. It just doesn't work that way.
One thing about the testing numbers, we saw a very slight dip right after the week of Thanksgiving, and Dr. Jeff Duchin, the public health officer for Seattle King County, had said that that's exciting, that's somewhat hopeful, but also pointed out that a lot of the testing sites were closed over the holiday weekend, and going into the holidays, people simply don't have the time or busy, and is concerned that people won't be getting tested, and the testing sites won't get as many people coming through, and that's really concerning going through this month, and how reliable the numbers will be, since all we can really go off is people showing up at these test sites.
Another feature of this pandemic is that homeless shelters need to spread people out, just like other places, and we'll discuss that and a health tracker of getting dubious reviews and more when we come back and continue on the Week in Review. Stay tuned.
Support for KUOW comes from Seattle Bank. As a locally owned and managed bank, Seattle Bank thanks the frontline public service and healthcare professionals for their service in 2020. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Today, the European Union announced that its 27 members have agreed to a new target along the road to becoming climate neutral by 2050. You'll hear all about that today during BBC NewsHour, which begins at 1 p.m.
Support for KUOW comes from Geico, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. More information on auto insurance available at geico.com/Seattle or 1-800-947-AUTO.
It's 12:27, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke. I'm also inviting you to the Year in Review next week, Thursday evening, December 17. You can see it on YouTube. You can RSVP at our website, kuow.org/events. It's a free event, but check in there and RSVP, kuow.org/events. I think we have a few things to discuss when it comes to 2020 in review on Thursday evening. Right now, we are in the middle of our week in review, checking in this week with New York Times technology correspondent Karen Weise. We've got PubliCola's Erica C. Barnett and KUOW reporter Casey Martin, all realized visually on right now on, you can go to Facebook and go to YouTube and search KUOW Public Radio. Okay, continuing with the news this week, the Renton City Council moved ahead on a proposal to essentially evict the homeless people who've been staying in the Red Lion Inn and limiting the number of clients any homeless service location can serve to 100 people. King County has rented all 255 rooms at the Red Lion because hotels are empty and homeless shelters need to spread people out during the pandemic. But Chip Vincent with Renton's Community and Economic Development Department says the move has not worked out well.
They moved about 230 homeless individuals out of downtown Seattle into a thriving business district in the center of Renton. This is being very humane, but recognizing that these types of facilities have impacts on the surrounding neighborhood in which they're located. More than anything else, it's really a clarification of our rules, and given the issue and challenges we have faced with the Red Lion.
The city of Renton says some of the people staying at the Red Lion have been committing crimes. Mayor Durkan of Seattle called Renton's proposal to move residents out of the Red Lion, she called that unconscionable.
We know from the data that a number of the people we serve in Seattle were living in Renton when they became homeless. They were renting in Auburn and Kent and Bellevue. There is no city in our area that has escaped the affordability crisis we're in. There's no community that isn't touched by our underfunding of behavioral health needs, whether it's mental health or addiction. And we know that as a state, the foster care system and our criminal justice system fuel our homeless crisis. For any city to take the stance that they don't have a role in it, I think is wrong.
Erica, King County's been trying to spread the homelessness response beyond Seattle. This doesn't seem to bode well. How would you say that regional homelessness response is working?
Well, first, can I just say that the gentleman that you cited there, who the clip of audio said that it's in the middle of a neighborhood. It's actually at the intersection of 167 and 405. It's right across from a Walmart supercenter and a bunch of used car lots. So I think the characterization is a little inaccurate. But I think that it bodes very poorly for regional cooperation, because the idea behind creating a regional authority for homelessness was that everyone would sort of get on the same page, more or less, with how we're going to respond to homelessness as a region rather than as individual cities and subregions. And Renton, along with other cities, has done a lot already, and the Homelessness Authority isn't really even up and running yet. They don't have a CEO. And the process has been pushed back a bunch, but it doesn't bode well for how that's gonna work out. Renton has taken this action. They've also, along with a bunch of other cities, adopted a local sales tax to preempt the county sales tax for homelessness, and their local sales taxes could go for things like middle, income housing and housing for people making up to 80% of the Seattle area median. So, we're already seeing fracturing, and this was pretty predictable from the beginning. The cities exacted a bunch of commitments from the city of Seattle and King County to even agree to participate. One of which was that they wouldn't have to pay into it to actually support the operations of this authority. So not looking good so far.
And Erica, what will you remind us, what are the stakes if the regional approach to homelessness fails?
Well, I think the stakes are we would just go back to the old system that is, being dismantled right now. At the City of Seattle, the homelessness strategy and investment division of HSD would, have to revamp and start ramping up again. It's basically being dismantled right now. But in a big picture, you would have, say, Renton passing laws that ban homeless shelters. You would have maybe Kent doing similar things. I mean, there are cities actually a lot of cities, Bellevue even, have passed laws that make it very hard for homeless shelters to locate there. And so it would become, essentially a Seattle problem. And, the people who moved from the Morrison Hotel in downtown Seattle, run by DESC, were not moving from Seattle. They lived at a shelter in Seattle, stayed at a shelter because that's where the shelters are. That does not necessarily mean that they all are, downtown Seattle residents who need to stay in downtown Seattle. So that's kind of a weird ex post facto argument, I think, to say, oh, we just don't have homelessness in Renton. Well, you might not see homeless people in Renton because the Renton keeps shelters out and keeps homeless services out. So it's a chicken egg kind of question, I think.
So Casey, what kind of cooperation does seem to work?
I think what Erica said is so right. We already are starting to see, different neighborhoods, different communities respond to houselessness in around them. I've been up to a church in Edmonds that, a couple of years ago opened up a whole back lot, this huge lot right behind the church, and they were able to buy these prefab little trailer, individual homes for folks, and that was one thing that community was able to do. In Kirkland, they were just able to open up a 24-hour shelter for women and children. And, on the east side, that they've really struggled to have shelters open 24/7 for men, whole families, people who are able to bring pets and possessions. So it's so wildly different. And I've been able to see that, if a tiny house village is supported by the neighborhood that it's surrounded by, if there is cooperation there, those do work well. But I'm not seeing a lot of the top down, oh, this is a directive coming from the city or this is coming from the county. A lot of it is, how does a tent encampment, how do the people living there get along with the neighbors around them? Or how is a church providing a space or a food assistance program, specifically feeding that one tent encampment? That's where I see a lot of communities that are stable, a lot of people who are still able to work, a lot of people who are able to have kind of a safe community. But it's tough to see how there is a cohesive, organized regional response as the regional crisis is outpacing the response. Absolutely.
Karen, we're going to get to your particular news beat in a few minutes, but any reaction to this story before we roll on?
No, some of it, I just remember back when the head tax stuff was blowing up 2 years ago and everything like that. Part of the question was, why is this a Seattle thing? This is this should be regional. And then there was this whole effort to set up the regional stuff, and it's a dispiriting chicken and egg thing of a hot potato who's responsible, because the kind of waiting for a regional response really put some local things on hold at the time. So they all are all connected.
And finally, Erica, can Renton make the decision to essentially evict people from the Renton Red Lion, or does King County have the authority to override that decision? Do you know how that works?
Well, I think we're going to see, because I think this will end up in litigation, most likely. They're trying to do it through zoning laws, which, speaking of novel and innovative legal arguments, is a novel way of doing it. They're trying to essentially zone out the Red Lion as a shelter and zone out shelters for most parts of Renton. So I think, there's another lawsuit that's currently ongoing about another zoning argument Renton is making against the Red Lion. So I expect this is not going to be settled anytime soon.
Coming up, the Chamber of Commerce sues to have Seattle's new payroll tax overturned. Does that tax violate a right to earn a living? That's coming up when we continue on Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from BloodWorks Northwest. BloodWorks is collecting convalescent plasma donations from those who have previously tested positive and recovered from COVID-19. Antibodies in plasma donations could help patients currently sick with the virus. Information to sign up at bloodworksnw.org. And from Neighborhood Fred Meyer stores, with a belief that there is much to be thankful for this holiday season. The Fred Meyer app and website offer ways to shop a selection of fresh food for holiday celebrations. Details about pickup available at fredmeyer.com. Fred Meyer, fresh for everyone.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:37. Coming up at 1 o'clock on BBC NewsHour, you're going to hear about new genetic evidence that could help identify potential treatments for COVID-19. It's 45 degrees in Seattle, clouds today, but sun tomorrow. And now we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
This is Bill Radke with KUOW's Casey Martin, PubliCola's Erica C. Barnett, and the New York Times' Karen Weise. Following the news this week, the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce sued the city of Seattle over its upcoming payroll tax. The tax would raise an estimated $200 million per year for COVID relief, affordable housing, and more. KUOW reporter Paige Browning says the Chamber of Commerce opposes a tax that big businesses would pay based on how many of their employees make $150,000 or more.
The Chamber of Commerce says the tax is actually adding another headwind to the city's economic recovery and discourages businesses from investing here. Their lawsuit claims the city unlawfully imposed a tax on the right to earn a living.
A right to earn a living. That lawsuit cites a case from Bellingham in which the state Supreme Court ruled that a city cannot tax the ability to earn a living. Mayor Durkan told me the city attorney will defend that tax in court. When I asked the mayor about it, she made it sound like it was too early for her to really parse that argument or go into it much. So we'll see. Any reaction to that lawsuit or the effect that lawsuit may have?
I think it's really interesting that the chamber is throwing its lot in, and it's not, terribly surprising, but they're throwing their lot in with Amazon and the very small percentage of large businesses that this tax will actually impact. Grocery stores are exempted from the tax. Any business with less than $7 million in revenues and that doesn't pay workers $150,000 an hour or $150,000 a year or more is exempted. But what the tax would actually
in payroll, I think.
In payroll, sorry. Getting it mixed up with the old head tax. But the impact of the actual expenditures that would come out of this tax is a net positive for small businesses. I mean, the first 2 years of the revenues are supposed to be spent on direct COVID relief for businesses like childcare providers, like small brick and mortar businesses, to help them keep their doors open. And so, in a way, this lawsuit pits Amazon against those small businesses and individuals that would be directly helped with funding, cash in their pockets from this tax. So I think that's an interesting political stance that the Chamber of Commerce is taking, which is essentially, Amazon versus, your local record store or your local clothing shop, and we'll see how that plays out. But that hasn't gotten reported on enough, so I wanted to mention that.
Yeah. By the way, Karen, the suit coming from the Chamber of Commerce and not from Amazon, as some people thought might happen.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Amazon has not commented since on the jump start tax, like ever, I think, and to some degree, their relationship with the city had soured before that. So I don't think this one tax is make or break for anything. They've already announced, commitments to grow on the east side, which makes sense for a lot of reasons. I don't think this is solely a tax-driven decision. A lot of tech workers work on the east side too, and they need a lot more space. But at the same time, obviously, Amazon is part of the chamber, and there's hard to imagine the chamber is on the board of the chamber. So you can't imagine the chamber doing this if Amazon did not support the concept of this lawsuit. But I think for Amazon, it doesn't. The company has not come out looking very good in the head tax fight and the election last year, and so I think this is a moment where they're politically choosing to say, to stay silent, essentially. And again, they would. It's clear they would like the outcome if the chamber were to win. I mean, I don't think anyone is denying that this tax was basically headed straight at them. But the politics of it are so intriguing to me that they've been quiet.
Mm-hmm. Casey Martin, anything to add?
So much has changed since the head tax. I like what Karen said, that it's been funny to watch Amazon just kind of quietly stay back and just kind of, like let this shake out at least for now. I remember, standing in front of the Amazon spheres and, to see so many workers and Shama Sawant there and the chants, the counter protests. It'd be interesting to see how the politics will shake out. So much has changed, and it was interesting to watch, of course, the city council, bring back the head tax. I think that there could be a lot, more, especially how Amazon looked coming out of the head tax fight. I think there could be more public support for this sales tax. But it is interesting to see them just kind of, quietly.
And have you guys heard? I haven't. I'm curious. This tax was designed really to target larger businesses and high wage earners. And I'll be curious if small businesses come out opposing the chamber or do anything along that line, because part of the chamber's argument is that this is helping. This is impeding the recovery from the crisis and the pandemic. And Amazon has had record sales and profits during the pandemic. I mean, there are industries that are suffering, and e-commerce is just not one of them. And so I'll be curious if that tension or that argument, like how that holds up among the business community. I guess we'll see some. I mean, I haven't heard a vocal opposition to this, or not a significant one, at least.
I mean, I haven't heard that either.
Yeah. We'll get out. You're talking to the KUOW newsroom here as well.
You got some calls
that.
to make.
Sorry, what was that, Erica?
Oh, I haven't heard that. I mean, I think it's a little different than the head tax in that this is a lawsuit. It's not a public campaign for an initiative or anything like that. I was going to ask you, Karen, I thought that one of the issues with Amazon coming forward about and being say a plaintiff in a lawsuit themselves is that they would have to disclose a lot of information about their revenues and about their local payroll and what they're paying people, and they just really don't want to do that. And so having the chamber do this, I thought would somewhat insulate them from that kind of scrutiny. Is that your understanding?
Well, I think my understanding is that the estimate of how much revenue would bring in, they actually don't have a specific figure for the top tier, because Amazon's the only company in that top tier. And so I know some people were hoping that there might then be discovery from the state, like through the state, over Amazon's payroll and investment essentially in Seattle, or their workforce in Seattle specifically. I mean, big picture, we know some of Amazon's finances, it's a public company, but I think there are still other venues to learn about them, because they are the only employer at this super high tier of taxation.
And Karen, can we talk about another lawsuit that
super
Amazon
high relative? Sorry, that wasn't a judgmental. That wasn't my opinion. That was more just like the highest tier I meant to say in the structure. Sorry.
There's another lawsuit, Karen, that Amazon might be interested in. Washington State is one of more than 40 states accusing Facebook of buying up its rivals to illegally squash competition. Now, we've heard these complaints before, so how big a deal is this lawsuit?
The lawsuit is a big deal. You have 40 states, bipartisan, plus DC and the FTC, their Federal Trade Commission, saying kind of collectively that Facebook's prior acquisitions of WhatsApp and Instagram should be unwound. And that is way farther than I think pretty much anyone expected them all to take. It just shows how much the opinions and the kind of consensus, or the Overton window, people say, what's acceptable about thinking about antitrust issue has shifted in a few years. Facebook's argument is that these acquisitions were approved by the FTC itself 5-8 years ago, whatever it was when they happened. I don't remember off the top of my head. And it also has kind of reignited this conversation about how antitrust laws were written like very pre-digital era, and things are growing so quickly now that, like, how do you keep ahead? Where WhatsApp had like almost no employees when Facebook bought it, and now it's this huge huge platform. And so things grow so quickly that it's like, how do regulators stay ahead of that? And do they need, or can we create new tools to manage kind of the digital economy side of antitrust versus these kind of historic regulations?
I don't suppose you care to make any predictions about how a lawsuit like this against Facebook could affect, I guess, beyond them. I'm thinking about Amazon and Google and other big tech companies with a major presence here.
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, the attention is not on them. I mean, I think right now, Facebook and Google has its own, the Department of Justice sued Google. So they have their own thing. But if you're Apple or Amazon, in some sense, you have you're not in the limelight for a little bit. And most people are pretty happy with it. That said, a broader conversation about antitrust and changing potential regulations or setting precedent for unwinding acquisitions like that in the long term isn't an ideal situation for them.
Okay.
But in the short term, I think I'm sure they're happy it's not them. Let's put it that way.
And speaking of tech companies, this is the season for gifted gadgets. And I saw that Amazon would like you to buy its new fitness tracker.
Improving your health starts with better understanding it. It's time to see how the daily choices we make, from how much we move, to how well we sleep, to how we communicate, to how we measure our body, all connect to form a more complete picture of our health. Introducing Amazon Halo.
Karen, the early reviews I've seen of this thing are not good, but tech is your beat at the New York Times. What should we know?
The reviews were really not good. It's my colleague, our columnist who reviews tech, came out with his a couple of days ago, the Washington Post the next day, and they were pretty scathing about this Amazon's foray into what are called wearables, but these kind of fitness tracker devices. And Amazon's pretty late to the party. The Fitbit's been around for a long time, Apple Watch, Garmin's, there's a whole, elaborate ecosystem of these now. But they said that they had, they felt they could bring something new to the table. And the kind of two new things they were promoting was this, one was this idea what they call tone. And it's essentially trying to be more holistic about your mental health. And they kind of listen to your voice and try to analyze your tone if you're being, it's idea, check your tone, but are you being dismissive or rude or happy or whatever? And maybe by tracking it, you might be able to improve it. And then the other thing they did was they have this full body scan where you kind of like strip down to your underwear and take photos and scan your body. And it's supposed to be a way to measure your body fat, which they say is in a more accurate way, they say, than your body mass index, which is more of a crude indicator. But both of those were lambasted pretty strongly in both of the reviews. So they were like almost, you read reviews that are almost painful to read. These were kind of in that category. The tone was seen as being potentially gendered in how it spoke down to women. The body mass issue, it wasn't clear. The reviewers raised questions as to whether or not it was accurate. Amazon says theirs is more accurate, but they haven't released any data. They haven't done any peer review. These things don't need like FDA approval. So there's not an outside way to validate their statement that they have a more accurate measure. And the other thing, just one last thing about this body image fat modulator thingy, it basically produces a picture of your body, and it has this little slider where you can kind of look at what your body might look like if it gets more body fat or less body fat. And it's a very like body image driven look at health essentially. And I kind of feel like we were kind of moving away from that societally, and that trying to have health be more about health than like body image stuff. So I feel I was a little surprised, frankly, when I had the demo of it, given in general, obviously people want a healthy population, but that it's very focused on what you look like, essentially.
Okay, Casey and Erica, who's up for stripping to our underwear for body measurement and having our voices recording for tone analysis? Am I right?
Look, I mean, Bill, as you know, as I've said on the show before, I will never buy one of these Amazon devices. I don't know what arbitrary line I am making in my mind between that and like an Apple Watch or a Garmin. But for me, it just feels so invasive to have something particularly well, obviously to send a naked photo of myself essentially to Amazon and trust that they're going to delete it is like, it's wild to me that anyone would do that. But I think that Amazon would give us these devices for free if they could, because they're using it to figure out how to market more crap to us from their mega mall online, which is their, reason for existence. So there's that. The tone thing to me is hilarious because as any woman who has ever been on the radio or podcast knows, or a meeting with a man knows that we get our tone policed all the time.
Yeah, we'll tell you what you sound like.
Every time I go on your show, Bill, I get letters. Yeah. I get letters about, I say, too much, or I sound too shrill, or, and so to the idea of willingly strapping a device to my body that tells me that, no, thank you. And also, one thing that was hilarious about this to me, I was reading these reviews and I was like, well, what does it look like? Like, what does it tell you? It's just a band. There's no screen on this thing. So it's like, it creates extra work for you to go to your other devices, your phone or your iPad or whatever, to see what it's telling you. And it's just this like ugly little band that you put on your arm. And as I'm raising my arm, like here I am with my own fitness tracker.
Yeah, I see that.
I will say the reason there's not a screen on it, which I actually felt was compelling, was it holds a charge for more than a week. And I am an Apple Watch person, and my thing is constantly running out of battery. So I do appreciate that, but I understand what you're saying.
It's just so strange to me as somebody who doesn't really like to have anything on my arm anyway, that to put something voluntarily on my body that contains no information that I can access. It just seems like a very, very bad product design.
Casey, how are you living here?
I worry about the privacy issues. I think that smart devices are an excellent way to listen to public radio, KUOW, of course. But for me personally, I'm always terrified of this prospect that it's listening. And as somebody who interviews people and it will be in a room in a very private, intimate setting, recording somebody, I'm terrified. I like turning my phone off during interviews, so there's no question that I'm secretly recording or anything. And I always get super paranoid about the privacy. Like Erica, I'm definitely drawing like an arbitrary line because I always have at least one phone on my person at any given time. And I've decided that that's safe. I've condoned that phones are fine. But I don't know why strapping something to my wrist, it's too much for me. So I do think, people with medical, I think it's exciting to live in a time where we do have such affordable, accessible technology for people, who do have medical reasons for this. I think it's great, for somebody like, my grandmother, who's had a stroke and a heart attack. I think something like this would be fantastic for her to kind of keep a daily track of things like that. But privacy, it's not for me. Maybe it's not yet anyway.
I think they have such an uphill battle in terms of this privacy that, they say they built this data set is built from the ground up. It's much of it is stored locally, doesn't even go to their cloud. If the retail business doesn't have access to it, there's all these things that they said this was kind of a brand new venture built from the scratch as if the rest of Amazon didn't exist essentially. But it's still, I think, very hard for people to trust that will last, whatever it may be. So it's an interesting question about like, how do you get people over that hurdle from like a business perspective? And you may not. I mean, Amazon makes products that fail, and this might be one of them. And then 5 years, maybe you'll learn some iteration of it that turned into something else or whatever.
Yeah, and nobody looks at the terms and conditions when they update them. So, even if they are telling the truth now, I don't trust that they won't change it in the future to, for example, save all my recordings, or keep the photos of people in their underwear somewhere, and if it's somewhere, it can be hacked.
And I know.
All right, well, I would say that. Yes, Casey.
Just this last lawsuit, the FTC against Facebook, they made a point of pointing out, well, how are users hurt by this? When we think about how, data, what's the big crime here? They said, people's personal data was bought and sold without them knowing. And, that lawsuit was specifically against Facebook, obviously, but I think that's the concern about this kind of these privacy concerns of, if we don't always read the fine print, what's being sold online that we are just being aware of.
This new Amazon fitness tracker is not making my guests smile. This is the end of the show where I do ask you what's making you smile. I'll start with the fact that I learned from King 5 that there's a place on Lake City Way where you can vent your frustrations physically. It's called Rage Industries. And the owner, Leslie Wynn, says you show up and smash things.
There's like a variety of things you can pick, like toilets, TVs, printers, bottles, and then you pick out your weapon. We have like bats, sledgehammers, crowbars, pans even, and then you use those weapons to hit the items.
Maybe you could bring a fitness tracker if you want. You can bring your own stuff. You sign a liability waiver, you wear safety gear, and there is a camera recording your outburst.
You kind of learn something about yourself, and while you start throwing those bottles and you're like, man, I didn't know I had all this pent up inside of me.
You feel all that tension just leave your body.
This feels great to let it out.
You just feel happy, and calm.
Cheers.
Now, this is not my personal cup of tea, smashing teacups, but whatever works. Anything making you smile this week, folks?
Other than that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I'm watching The West Wing, which is on Netflix through, I think, the end of the month. I'm powering through the first 4 seasons, AKA the good seasons. And don't at me with all the problems with the show. I am aware of them. I still love it. It's comfort food.
Casey, Karen? Yeah.
Well, it's Hanukkah, so that's fun. It's always a weird time. Hanukkah in Seattle is strange because it's a reminder that there are not many Jews in Seattle. It's like really hard to find Hanukkah candles in this city. I have to tell you, last year I went to like 4 or 5 different stores and had to get $30 ones at PCC.
At PCC, I was gonna. Okay.
Very expensive beeswax candles, and I just was resigned that that's the price of being Jewish in Seattle. I didn't know what else to feel. I was so frustrated.
Well, good
but I'm
Hanukkah
happy to
to
be
you.
celebrating and frying some latkes this weekend. So
Yeah, very good. Yes, Casey.
Megan Farmer, KUOW photojournalist, found the Seattle Santa snow globe. A lot of media has reported this, but if you had told me that there was a live action Santa snow globe, I don't know if I'd be that compelled or interested, but her photo, she really kind of captured the magic. Late at night, the Santa is in what looks like a beautiful crystal snow globe. Little kids are pressed up right up against the glass, noses pressed up against, smudging up, just thrilled to see this Santa, of course, social distancing because of COVID. And Megan, really just kind of captured this, and it made me smile. It was a beautiful photo series. Highly recommend those shots.
Very good. Thanks for the smiles. And, every week we ask our guests, what's making you smile. Here at the end of the year, I want to ask you, listener, because we could use it for our upcoming year in review show. We're going to air some of what is making you smile. So leave us a voicemail right now, 206-221-3663. That's 221-3663. What's making you smile? And then join us Thursday evening for a live year in review. It'll be up on YouTube. You can RSVP for this free event at KUOW.org/events. Now, Karen Weise of the New York Times, Erica C. Barnett of PubliCola, Casey Martin of KUOW. Happy all the holidays to all of you. And thank you so much. I love spending this time with you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
bye.
Bye.
Bye now. And by the way, Tio Popescu and Juan Pablo Chiquiza make it possible for us to be seen online. Our show's produced by Casey Martin, by Sarah Leibovitz. Sorry. I'll see you next week.